Ben 10 has a lot of retcons, from the plumbers and their frequent change in status, to Gwen and her magic being changed from a simple skill to then being hereditary, and of course the ever-changing backstory for Kevin and his Osmosian background. Retcons are something that hit all long-running franchises. You take a pick of any long-running franchise you can think of, and it probably has a big retcon that the fans have a strong opinion about. After watching Totally Not Mark's video about Dragon Ball and its many retcons, it dawned upon me that Ben 10 and Dragon Ball are very similar in this situation, with heavy retcons that have a lot of fans. Retcons are discussed heavily in the Ben 10 community, and a lot of them are still actively disliked to this day. And while I do understand the frustration and just overall disapproval of many of these retcons, I think the question of, are retcons really bad for a series, is a question that definitely needs to be addressed when you speak about Ben 10. Because if you ask any fan about any retcon, they're probably going on this big rant about how the many retcons in the Naruto's arc made it hard for them to sleep at night. And speaking of sleep, I want to thank today's sponsor, MatthewBitts. As someone who spends most of his nights writing video scripts and thinking of video ideas, it is important that I get a good night's sleep. And thanks to MatthewBitts' comfortable sleep masks with their soft eye cups that add absolutely zero pressure onto your eyes or eyelids while you sleep, you are bound to get in a good night's sleep, or even a good midday nap. MatthewBitts has a variety of masks for you to choose from. You have the steam mask, the cool mask, the weighted mask, the silk mask, which is the one I was personally sent and have been using non-stop. And lastly, the sound mask that has built-in Bluetooth headphones that allow you to listen to your necessary sleep sound. The masks are also very portable, so you can carry them with you anywhere you go if you ever need to. You never know, you might need to catch some emergency sleep, or if you're going to that friend's house to like to sleep with the TV on. Sleep is very important no matter who you are, so be sure to check out MatthewBitts by clicking the link in the description and use code BOYWONDER to get 10% off at checkout. And thank you again to MatthewBitts for sponsoring this video. When talking about retcons, it's important to identify what exactly a retcon is. Looking up the definition, a retcon is a piece of new information that imposes a different interpretation on previously described events, typically used to facilitate a dramatic plot shift or account for an inconsistency. So things like Vilgax or Ben's constant personality shifts don't qualify as retcons, nor does something like feedback being introduced between Classic and Alien Force, as that just wouldn't make for a retcon, as it's not really new information that changes any mentioned events that came before his existence. He really just inserted into a vague area of the timeline. Also, to keep it simple for me, I'm only going to be discussing the more notable retcons in Ben 10, so I'm not going to be talking about any of the crew statements or the merchandise information or even the pop-up trivias that all end up getting retconned or retcon something else, because that's like its own little rabbit hole. So you know, it can make for its own video if you guys want that. You know, hit that like button if you want that, and that's the best way to tell me. Although I will mention that a few of them are going to come up in this video. By a few I mean like maybe 2, because I honestly did find a couple of them very interesting, and unfortunately for a classic it doesn't have the many retcons, so just to give it some love, I took a little bit from there. You know, I'm kind of like retconning my own video like as we speak right now. Isn't that crazy? Just someone brand. And like I said, the classic series barely has any retcons considering it was the first series, and it's kind of just the one that gets hit with the retcons instead of retconning things, but it still has a few interesting ones, like how the plumbers were stated to be all retired after Vilgax was defeated in the 70s. However, this was a retcon due to the fact that Joel and Camille, the couple who gets married in the episode Big Fat Alien Wedding, a mission that would have taken place years after their so-called retirement in the 70s. And I'm glad that this was changed, as it's nice for the plumbers to still sort of be active, even though we don't see that many active members in the show. I know I said Classic was forced to take retcon attacks from future series, but thanks to Destroy All Aliens coming out years after Classic, it did get the chance to join in on the action. As in Alien Force, Gwen says she never performed a tracking spell, when in Destroy All Aliens, she in fact does perform a tracking spell.
I can't pinpoint Ben with a locating spell. This is the last place I pick up any trace of his energy.
Some extra classic retcons come from merchandise information, the one time I'll mention it in this video, and the information includes how 66 was claimed to be an android on our info card until Secret of the Omniverse showed that he's in fact not an android, but instead a living being called a Soteronigan, who was mutated. Cannibal also had an info card that was retconned, as the info card implied that he was a volcanic Tortagon from Vulpin, the planet of Wildmutt's home species. But this was of course changed in the Big Tick to have Cannibal instead be an Albarian Polarota from the planet Albaria. Well, it would have been cool to have Cannibal and Wildmutt be similar species who inhabit the same world. I much prefer Cannibal having his own species and lore, especially since it's one of the more well-known species in Ben 10, even though they went extinct, funny enough. Now, Alien Force is where the retcons really started to roll in, as for some reason Alien Force had a desire to take away basically every supernatural element in Classic and make it all alien. The first of which was changing the plumbers from a government organization made up of mainly humans to them now being an intergalactic space force made up of both humans and aliens. This also introduced another retcon of the Omnitrix symbol being the logo for the plumbers and the Galvan race, when in classic it was just Asmon's way of just branding his technology and just his outfits. You know, it was like his odd future logo, if you get what I'm saying. Even though the plumbers go through more retcons in Omniverse, I will say that I prefer what Alien Force did with them over the other shows. I like the fact that they're basically space patrol, and including alien races into the organization makes more sense than them just being an entirely Earth-based operation. Now, while I like Alien Force's first big retcon, I can't say the same for its second and most popular retcon, with how they retcon Gwen and her magic. Classic treated Gwen's magic as a skill for her to learn and develop throughout that show, and we even see that she did get better at it in Alien Force. But it was revealed in Alien Force that Gwen has some DNA from an energy-based alien species called Anodites who can manipulate mana, which is another form of magic in this universe, as all explained to her by the grandma Verdona. The whole magic alien race backstory for Gwen's magic is a retcon that the community still debates about today on whether or not it hurt or helped the franchise, and in my personal opinion, I did much prefer when Gwen didn't have these ties to magic, and instead it was just a smart and dedicated enough person to just learn it and get good at it. Also, Verdona herself is also a retcon, since in the movie Race Against Time, which was canon until Ultimate Alien basically blipped it out of existence, it was stated that their grandma had passed away in that movie, and Verdona being here is basically like a big, middle finger to that whole thing. But it doesn't matter anyway, because like I said, Ultimate Alien basically just destroys any piece of canon validity Race Against Time has. Alien Force features a few smaller retcons, like changing Volcanus to being a buff hulking alien in classic, to an Alien Force where he's just a small little guy in a big suit. Another retcon that I don't mind actually, because I enjoy Volcanus in UAF. In classic, it is shown that Max doesn't know Kevin, which was slightly retcon, with Max being partners with Devin, Kevin's father, giving the Tennysons and Levin some pre-existing. Man, just thinking about that whole backstory with Devin and Max, I really hope that they keep that piece of info, as Devin was so cool. I hope they don't try to say that it was like a false memory or something, because that would be just lame as fuck to do. Alien Force also retcon Upchuck being able to eat normal food, as we see him drink a Mr. Smoothie. Another controversial change Alien Force made was how the Omnitrix works, with the introduction of Primus. It was retconned that the Omnitrix does not contain the DNA, but is instead a receiver for the codon stream that contains all the DNA. I always disliked this retcon though. It's always been like one of my least favorites, as I feel like it overly complicates the Omnitrix and its functions just for the sake of adding some forced new lore. I thankfully didn't have to tolerate the whole Primus codon stream for too long, as Ultimate Alien comes out with a retcon to it immediately, as it was stated that the codon stream on Primus contained DNA of every single sentient species, but we immediately see Ben scan Bivalven's DNA to obtain the transformation, which is hilarious because I think that's like a little inside jab to how even the writers knew that Primus was lame, but maybe that's just me being a hater. It's most likely me being a hater. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Ultimate Alien's most notable retcon all came from the Ben 10K Returns episode, where they make it so Race Against Time was basically no longer canon. Instead, it's now an alternate timeline due to the events in this episode. Eon of Race Against Time was a Cronian, an alien race of people who could control time, but all that was retconned in his Ultimate Alien debut, where the Cronian species didn't exist at all, and Eon was instead an evil Ben from an alternate reality. Now, Race Against Time is definitely one of the movies to ever be made of all time, but even with that being said, the introduction of Eon and the whole Cronians lore was a piece of that movie that I actually did like. I mean, tell me a group of time-traveling aliens does not sound badass, bro. Especially when in Ultimate Alien, he came back looking like a cool-ass robot ninja, and sadly this retcon just kind of soured mine and others' perception on Eon, which kind of sucks. I think he gets like done the worst out of like any of the real big bad villains in Ben 10. But I mean, fuck him, I guess. Ultimate Alien made a few small retcons to Kevin's powers. In classic, he ended up turning into his mutated form due to rage and just lack of control over the power he absorbed, while in Ultimate Alien they kind of changed it, as when we see Kevin go to absorb the Ultimatrix, he comes out already in his amalgamated form instead of having to cycle through the forms like he was shown to do in his first appearance and in the episode Frame. Also, another small retcon in Ultimate Alien was in classic, where Max says he met Verdona in St. Louis. This is now changed to have the. Now, I'm sure when you read the title and seen the word retcon and Ben 10, you immediately thought of Omniverse, and you wouldn't be wrong, as Omniverse definitely has some of the most mind-numbing, head-scratching, and kind of just random and overall most controversial retcons. They do a lot of weird things, like change the pronunciation of Albedo's name from Albedo to Albedo.
Albedo, my former assistant. Albedo! Nice to see you have not lost your talent for stating the obvious.
One of Omniverse's smaller yet disappointing retcons though was the change to Ditto's powers. In Classic, all the Ditto clones shared pain. If one was hurt, all the other Dittos would feel it. But Omniverse ended up making them all independent beings. I really disliked this retcon as it made Ditto less unique as an alien, especially when compared to Echo, but I guess they kinda had to do that as it wouldn't make sense for Ben to use him if he had this really core weakness, but it's just really upsetting as Ditto was one of my favorite aliens and it all just made him a less unique alien. Speaking of aliens, Alien X got hit with a few small Omniverse retcons. In UAF, only 2 personalities had to agree, whereas in Omniverse, all 3 must agree, which added a stronger handicap to Alien X's power. That was until we see Ben make Bellic and Serena basically give him the keys to the powers in that one episode, so you know, make of that what you will. Ultimate Alien told us that celestial sapiens spend majority of their time debating.
Am not.
R2.
Am not.
R2.
But Omniverse establishes that they actively do other things, like change up the show's art style.
Celestial sapiens change the universe all the time. Even first thinker Asma's voice and appearance has changed on at least 3 occasions.
One of my favorite retcons from Omniverse is them changing Ultimate Ben from being Ben's quote-unquote true future to now making it Omniverse Ben 10K. As I believe that one was for the best because no one likes Ultimate Ben, and that being Ben's real future overall was just kind of like fucking lame. I mean, nobody likes Ultimate Ben. Also, the plumbers suffer yet another retcon, this time making it so that there were both Earth plumbers and intergalactic plumbers. They just served as separate factions until they eventually joined together. Omniverse once again though changes their symbol from the Omnitrix logo to this new red spot badge, and in my opinion I much prefer the red spot over the Omnitrix symbol. Now Omniverse introducing these 11-year-old Ben flashbacks, they were just bound to cause some retcons. And Alien Force Ben mentioned the last time he saw Vilgax was when he was 10.
He's more powerful than ever, and we barely used to beat him in the old days.
We were like 10 years old.
But in a flashback, we see that they had a run-in when he was in fact 11. These flashbacks cause even more issues though when we get to the episode From Herodium to Eternity. As an Alien Force, Ben and Gwen were confused to know that Cooper and Kevin knew each other, but this episode in Omniverse basically serves as the origin to their partnership that Ben and Gwen are present for. Secondly, Ben and Alien Force, he first met Kevin again, was the first time he witnessed Kevin's new power to absorb matter, until this episode aired and showed that actually this is his first time witnessing it. The last of Omniverse's notable retcons, of course, come from the Rooters arc, and mainly how Omniverse made it so Osmosians, the alien species that Kevin is a part of, don't actually exist. The term Osmosian now refers to a subspecies of human with a unique genetic component that gives them powers that vary between individuals, rather than them being a different species of human like aliens with absorption powers. Cervantes, the main villain in this arc, also says that the memories of Devin Levin that Max had were all just fake and fabricated. This large retcon to such a rich part of the world still causes so much discussion today, as people are still upset about it, and I for one happen to be one of those people upset. I enjoyed the Osmosian lore a lot in UAF and everything that they were doing to build it up, especially when Agregor came into play, adding more to it, and for Omniverse to basically Thanos snap it out of existence is definitely frustrating. This episode also changed the backstory for Helen, Pierce, and Manny. As an Alien Force, they are said to be half human, half alien hybrids due to them having alien parents.
So we're all alien?
Kinda. One of your parents must have been human. The other, not so much.
However, the Rooters episode changes that as well, making it so that they were in fact born human, but just had their DNA fused with alien DNA. The hard retcons the Rooters arc makes to the Plumbers Helpers, and especially to the Osmosians, are really the main culprit when you think of bad retcons in Ben 10. And yes, to me these retcons are definitely unnecessary, but I don't think these or any of the other controversial retcons mean that they are really bad as a whole. I think us Ben 10 fans have let a few bad apples spoil the bunch. Many of the retcons I stated in the video I believe were for the better of the franchise. The Plumbers are constantly retconned, yet I think all of the retcons that they suffered were for the better. Turning them from Earth-based to intergalactic to then being stated to just be both the entire time, all made for really good changes. I don't know anyone who actually liked the idea of Primus, so it being retconned to just be a thing in the background instead of a soul where the Omnitrix operates its DNA was also for the better. But of course, for every good retcon, like the Plumbers, you of course have your bad ones like the Gwen Magic retcon or, you know, the big Osmosian one. I think the fact that the major retcons all being controversial just boils down to the fact that they affect 2 important characters like Kevin and Gwen, so that was just destined to bring them in a lot of hate. I believe that hate for retcons are justified to some degree, and criticism of them are definitely valid, but I don't believe they're always this bad thing for a franchise. I mean, Ben 10 is a long-running series, so not everything was planned out and not everything was the best idea when looking back on. So retcons were kind of inevitable when it came to the series, but that doesn't excuse their lack of pleasure at all. If I had it my that way, I would definitely make it so some of these things weren't changed at all, as I don't agree with every single retcon. But to be honest, I only get upset at a retcon when it kills my enjoyment of a show, and Benton doesn't really have one that does. I dislike the changes to Kevin and Gwen, but it never dampened my enjoyment for the characters or any story arc they were involved in. Hell, I actually really enjoyed the Rooters arc even with the retcons, which is definitely probably a hot take, but Benton has a lot of retcons, some good, some bad, some unnecessary, and some just flat out stupid. And funny enough, there are a lot more retcons to take into account if I did include the pop-up trivia, the crew statement, the merchandise info. So if you want a part 2, hit that like button, show the video some love if y'all want a part 2. Also, let me know down below in the comment section if you have a favorite retcon, or if you have one that you wish didn't exist, and if you do, what would you change about it? Let me know down below how you feel about these retcons. And if you're new, make sure you subscribe, as well as turn that notification bell on, and make sure you check out Mantis down in the description below. Thank you again for sponsoring this video, and that has been your boy Dan, the Boy Wonder, signing out. Peace.